Had been 40 minutes of hard running. We were hot, tired and thirsty, but we'd finally outrun the swarm. The doctor seems to be just as capable at taking life with a gun as giving it, so to him went the 9mm I picked up earlier. It was far better in his hands, and I didn't really like the idea of him going toe-to-toe with an infected with a scalpel of all things. A few straggling zombies gave us a chance to test our new group. Myself and Brian in the lead, holding them back, and the doctor and Leslie shooting them. It turned out alright, and I finally found some replacement for my glasses that had been lost in the hurried struggles of earlier. By mid-morning, however, the exertion finally caught up with us. We needed to take a break. Getting off the road, we planted ourselves by a small group of trees. Enough cover that we couldn't be seen at a distance, but not enough that we couldn't see any infected creeping up on us. A small nap would do, but we wouldn't get much rest out here on the ground. I was struggling to keep my eyes open by the time I reached the junction, but here I needed to make a choice. If we headed south or east, we'd eventually reach Muldrath, but there wasn't much en route, just empty roads. Or we could head up north, towards West Point. There was a few outlying buildings on the way there, but West Point was smaller and had a larger population. If the infected had made it there, they'd be clumped together, but hopefully the survivors would have fought them back like we'd already seen. In my current state, north felt like the better choice, so with pie and painkillers I powered on through and started walking, my companions close behind. After an hour the doctor stopped me, having noticed my festering wound. Barely a word had been said amongst the group since then. Perhaps they just didn't want to get attached. Any of us could fall to the infection at any time, so I guess it's just a way of keeping everyone sane. Once I was treated, the doctor moved on to the others. This was probably wise. Any of us could have been infected and not really realise it, our own medical skill too poor to really know the signs. It had been several hours since our escape from the Horde. The words "head north" stuck in my brain, which is why, in my tired state when I saw the cars, I made the wrong turn. Exploring them for supplies, if we'd only kept east we would have reached the farmsteads towards West Point. But now I led us on a march through the various side roads. It would get us to West Point eventually, but it would take far longer. It may have been safer heading through the forests and the various campsites, but time was crucial and I may have made a huge mistake. Even with no sign of the infected, this was turning into a death march, the long walk draining us constantly. We tried to rest where we could, but it did little to help. As night fell, we didn't feel safe staying on the road. Instead, we took off into the woods, following an old camp trail. It would be nice, remote, and very little chance of the infected finding us. It turned out to be the correct choice. Just an hour down the road was a small pack of infected. However, they were police officers, which was a bad sign. West Point may have been overrun. But right now we had to go through them. We could have tried to go around them, but that would leave a pack of infected at our back, and we were still tired and exhausted from a restless night. Besides, they had various bits of equipment we needed, and there was perhaps a chance one of those cars was in working order. That would save us a lot of time. With this few of them, our plan went well. Brian and myself kiting the zombies away as the doctor and Leslie opened fire, downing most of them. Still, there was bloody work to be done, and it didn't help my constant ongoing panic. My nerves still shot, still remembering from the murder I was forced to commit just a few nights ago. Now we claimed our grisly prize. My clothes somewhat ruined, I replaced them in a full police uniform, taking bits and pieces from the various infected that weren't damaged. A bulletproof vest was also a nice find, though Brian too managed to claim one of these, meaning that both of us at the front lines would be well protected from any bites. Leslie had also claimed a jacket and a holster like myself. Feeling a little better now, we moved on to the cars. A few supplies inside, but nothing particularly worthwhile. The shotgun ammo would be useless until we found the gun to match. And hopefully we'd find one soon, but I wasn't going to hold my breath. By midday we'd made good progress, but just as we were about to rest, typically it began to rain. Some damaged cars nearby hinted at shelter, but they were too warped and we weren't able to go inside them. And, insult to injury, they were completely devoid of supplies. Eventually, with no other choice, we napped once more by the side of the road, sheltering under a large tree for about 2 hours before we resumed our journey. Again, we needed a proper bed. We could barely stand. More damaged, discarded cars hindered what was ahead before we finally came across another group of infected at the crash. Leslie and the doctor quickly disposed of them, making sure they couldn't get close. As much as I was grateful for the sharpshooting, at the same time I was getting a little worried. This was again noisy, and it could lure more infected to us. And supplies were running low. A first aid kit was nice, but it held less than the bag I carried. The doctor, on the other hand, could always do with a bit more carry space, so I handed it over to them. Once more I found myself cursing the lack of a backpack. That car battery would have been a vital find if I had the space to carry it. That night, in spite of an attempt to turn in early, Leslie had spotted an infected, shooting it before saying anything to the rest of us. Whilst I was glad we wouldn't be ambushed in our sleep, it meant we had to move on. If there was one, there was bound to be more, and the gunshot would have drawn them to us. I was growing increasingly worried though. My seemingly ample stock of food and water was running out, and I was constantly needing to take painkillers for minor aches. We needed a time to recuperate and resupply, and we just weren't getting it. If we reached West Point exhausted and it was overrun, we might all just die. I couldn't have known just how accurately I was foreshadowing events to come. West Point was going to be a challenge when we arrived. As dawn broke, I realised I'd been in a daze. If we'd turned through the forest at some point earlier, we could have reached the lakeside properties. These would have been full of supplies, possibly, but certainly very few infected. But now we didn't have any choice but to proceed and keep heading on to West Point. There wouldn't be any time to rest before we arrived. In hindsight, we should have taken the opportunity to rest at the camp we found, but naively we moved on. I did manage to get some new boots, my shoes damaged from stomping on various infected, but they would be a minor blessing for what could have been a far better outcome. With our increasing need for supplies and rest, I took the direct south road, or at least I intended to, but, much to our surprise, a large mass of infected were waiting for us. This was still far out of West Point, and there was already this many here. That was a bad sign. Not knowing that the North Road would be any better, and if we turned around it would take us till nightfall, we cut south through the tree line, just out of sight of the main road. A few infected wandering through the woods. Thankfully they didn't spot us as we moved through, carefully, stealthily, every crack of a bush causing my heart to race. So it was much to my relief when we finally made it back to the main road, not an infected in sight. If there'd just been one or two, I would have been pleased, just to whittle down the numbers, but, again, I was concerned. There shouldn't have been that many here, so why were there? The next choice I had was to move up, continuing north, and go along the riverside, or head straight into town. If we kept along the road, there was a farmhouse just a little off into the woods. It would have made a nice way to have a rest before we headed into town itself. So with that in mind, initially we started to head down. And then we spotted the stragglers, the pair of them stumbling down the road. Moving off into the grass, we decided to be cautious, keeping our eyes peeled. Where there's one infected, there's usually more. And we were right. Another 5 lay just down the road, all reasonably spaced out. Perhaps we could have taken them. But I found myself exhausted. I really needed rest. I was in no condition to be fighting. I was so close to West Point. Did I have a choice? almost stumbling into an infected. I decided to move forward and take care of it. Hopefully Brian would back me up. But I'd made a mistake. I'd forgotten to tell Leslie and the doctor had caught fire, and now we just rung the dinner bell for every infected in the area. I didn't have time to rest. We had to move. They were already stumbling towards the sound. Forced to abandon our plans for the southern farmhouse, now it's just survival. We needed to get through all these packs of infected without bringing them all together. If we kept heading east and slightly to the north, we'd hit the furthest edge of West Point. There was a farmhouse there, if I recalled, and perhaps we could rest. I could only hope. If we couldn't, then this exhaustion was going to be a killer. I could barely see in front of me, and this was becoming increasingly dangerous with the amount of zombies coming in. Thankfully the others were doing alright, covering my back, but after a few close calls, it was obvious I was going to get us all killed if I wasn't careful. It was something that I considered. It was barely drowned out by the haze of antidepressants. Even as I slammed my axe down again and again into the skull of the infected, I could only think, why are you not helping me? It seems that they, unlike the folk of Little Township, my companions were becoming increasingly passive. Perhaps it was just the way the exhaustion affected them. But if they didn't tell me what was happening, there was no way I could plan. Moving closer to our destination, groups of stragglers became more common. None of them particularly a threat by themselves, but all of them within earshot of each other. If we attacked one, then the whole group would move in. This was going to be a repeated problem throughout our journey. However, it seems like our careful persistence had paid off. We had avoided most of the infected. Moving ever closer, our destination was just about in reach. When everything went to hell, the doctor was forced to open fire. I couldn't even see the infected attacking us. Apparently they were close by, just behind the tree line. My tired eyes simply couldn't make them out. Brian took a bite. I think he was too exhausted to swing. He wasn't fighting back. And then everyone started moving in. We tried to stand our ground, but then a house alarm in the distance went off. Perhaps a zombie inside the house had heard us and smashed its way out. But the area was now going to be overwhelmed. All our work was for nothing. What made matters worse is it seemed like everyone was low on ammo. Once again, the lack of communication was with the infected coming up behind us, and most likely a horde ahead. All we could do was press on. We didn't have a choice now. We'd just have to find a building that was unoccupied and haul up. Much to my surprise though, the farm wasn't unoccupied. Other survivors were wandering around, and they were not nearly being as careful as we were. It may help in fighting off the various stragglers that were wandering the area, but most of them were, well, distracted trying to get into a building so desperately. Even though the barred windows have frustrated me, it probably saved my life. The horde had heard the gunshots from earlier and were moving in, beelining towards the sound of the door being rattled over and over. The barn was no use either. It was too open to be defended. So I ran towards the back. The road had infected on it, but perhaps we could slip away into the tree line. And pray that the zombies would move in and chase down the other survivors while we made our escape. It may have sounded heartless, but I'd wanted my crew to survive over anyone else. We didn't have a choice now, though. A lone straggler had got in our way, and the gunshots had alerted the rest of the horde, already finished with their prey. Diving into the woods, I was caught by tree and zombie alike. It was a hard fight. This close range was not our forte, and the others simply couldn't fight back. I tried to turn round and give them time to run. Panic had set in now, and all hell was breaking loose. Leslie was only making things worse. They were constantly shouting and screaming, with profanity spewing out of her mouth, just drawing in more of the horde. I could see them in the distance. I thought about trying to leap into the building, but I didn't have time to check the doors and windows. Moving around was the only option, and hopefully the gunshots in the distance would be our salvation. Around us, other survivors trying to flee were drawing in yet more hordes. Others were walking towards the sound of gunshots. There was a chance here in the confusion for us to survive, but all it would take is one panicking person to come in our direction, and then we'd all be screwed. I was running on pure adrenaline now. I could barely see, could barely think. There was no time to stop, no time to examine. We just had to keep moving. Leaving West Point wasn't an option. We needed to restock, we needed to resupply. We needed sleep. But we just didn't have any choice. We needed to find somewhere we could just haul up, whether it was to fight or just to hide out the horde. Hungry and desperate for energy, I rapidly just shoved some crisps into my mouth. It wouldn't be much, but it would keep me going. Unlike Brian, who'd finally fallen behind. The vest had saved him for a while, but the swarm brought him down. His screams still echoed in my mind, even if I tried to escape further. He didn't give us much time, and Leslie's panic scurrying had attracted yet more infected. Even as she tried to stop and bandage her wounds, it was only causing her to lag behind. I was frustrated, almost tempted to tell her to make her own way, but I didn't have time to stop. It was a bitter irony that I was cutting through the cemetery to try and buy time. I was nearing the sound of gunshots, and it looked like there was actually competent survivors down here. Maybe we'd find allies, someone who'd give us a break. But as I ran towards the church, I hoped that we could find some way of defending ourselves. But nothing. There was no room to haul up in here either. The zombies were already hammering at the windows. There wasn't any point having faith in this kind of situation. The gods help those who help themselves after all. And with other survivors drawing the attention of the zombies, we tried to move between the stragglers. The various infected still moving in, and with a single gunshot, turned around to face us. All we could do was move on. The doc taking a bite. I had to run. Thankfully they still were with us, but Leslie was just a headless chicken. She was constantly running back and forth, not knowing where she was going. But together we'd finally made it to the hole out, only to see that they were in no better condition. Barely fighting off the incoming infected, they were also running low on ammo. We'd find no help here. We just had to flee. All we had now was another horde coming right at us. I had no clue where Leslie was in this mess. I'd lost track of everyone. I was trying to keep the doc with me, but now he was panicking, injured, bleeding. Then I heard the scream. Leslie's panic fleeing had sent her straight into the hands of the infected. Now it was just me and the doc. I was so tired I couldn't even get over the fence. That was going to be my hope, escaping. The doc making a run for it. I wished him the best. I didn't expect him to come back for me. But he did. I wish he'd loaded his gun though. Instead, all he could do was run around, trying to distract the infected on the other side of the fence as I fought off the ones in front of me. Once more we were separated. More and more of them were heading towards me. I had to run back into West Point and pray that another survivor would distract them from me. So many small mistakes had led up to this. So many times I think back and go, what could I have done different? If I just turned left here, or moved in there, or taking up that small horde. I don't know. There was no sense dwelling on it at the time. I had more important things occupying my mind, like how not to get bitten by the 4 or 5 zombies that were right on my heels, and avoid walking into the rest of the infected as we stumbled through the undergrowth, desperately fleeing from house to house, hoping to find someone to distract them or help me fight them. The doc, I don't know what happened to them. I hope they lived, but it wasn't looking likely. They'd gone the way of Leslie, completely in a panic, barely avoiding running into group after group. They still had the gun. They may have had some ammo. Right now, I just had to concern myself with myself. even as everyone around me was being overrun, houses broken into, people fighting for their lives only to be devoured. I couldn't really make a difference. I had too many of the infected behind me. I was barely able to keep upright, barely able to walk. I couldn't fight. Wasn't really a choice. It may be black comedy looking back at this, but there was something that stuck in my mind. A house I ran past, completely boarded up from the outside. The idiot owner had boarded up everything, including that only door to the house for him to get back in. It made me sigh. It could have been a brilliant place to try and haul up. Instead, it was just a testament to the stupidity of mankind. Seeing a pair of lone survivors for a moment, I considered asking them to join me. However, one of them was unarmed and the other one had just run out of ammo. Right now, I didn't need the dead weight. Harsh, but when I couldn't defend myself, there was no way I could defend anyone else. Thankfully, the constant gunfire in the distance was drawing away the rest of the stragglers. There was only a handful of infected now, and most of the hordes were preoccupied elsewhere. Quite close by, but still not right next to me, and that was a blessing in itself. It gave me the freedom to escape past the more aggressive survivors, the ones who were still fighting for their home. I wish them the best of luck, but I think in the end it would be futile. Maybe they'd clear out the place, just like Little Township did, but right now, one thing I was concerned with was finding somewhere to sleep. The near windowless box house here, a perfect place to rest. Though getting in would be the problem, and then shutting off that damn radio. If I didn't do it fast enough, all that would happen is more zombies would appear, and I'd just have a new coffin.